we're going to take a small break from doing set 6 stuff and go back over into set 5 / Shaman King and go over Tao Ren, who I was able to pull basically the entire Shaman King rare ride line minus the grade 3 that I bought, which I was really excited about. Immediately made me want to play this deck. So I had a comment from a user, Misty Delta, on the LeSurge deck list asking if there'd be a Tao Ren one, and I'd figured, sure, yeah, we can do that. I have a list for that. So if you guys ever want me to do any sort of videos or anything like that, just let me know in the comments down below. I will more than likely make them possible. But starting off, we've got the grade 3 here, Unwavering Heart Tao Ren. So this has 2 skills, as expected from the Shaman King set. This is a shaman with the Oversoul ability, which says act on Vanguard circle once per turn. You can pay the cost of counterboss 1, put a rearguard with Bashong in its card name into your soul, then you will retire all of your opponent's front row rearguards, and this unit gets 10 cans at the end of that turn. Then, if you retired only 1 or less units, so if they only had 1 rearguard or they had nothing and you use this skill, then your opponent has to choose a card from their hand and discard it. So no matter what, your opponent cannot prevent or cannot play around losing 2 cards, which is a pretty nice little nifty skill that they have. So it makes it very interesting, very sort of tactical and able to control your opponent's board and hand. Then we have here a second skill which just says when this hits when it just hits, doesn't have to hit Vanguard, which just hits, you search your deck for up to 1 grade 3 or greater card with Tao Ren in its card name, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle your deck. So in general, how this deck works is actually it's kind of just like Youthberg Light or Youthberg Control, because it has 2 main playstyles or functions or gimmicks, however you want to call it. The first one being this skill here, which gives the Vanguard power and also makes it so you retire your opponent's rearguard as well as their hand, so you control their board and what they can throw out, which is really nice. The second skill here is actually what lets you search out a grade 3, which makes it similar to Youthberg, where Youthberg right now just kind of has a lot of deck thinning, which allows them to, check triggers and go into their big revolve forms. However, the biggest difference is that Tao Ren doesn't really have the most threatening Vanguard swings as Youthberg does, and that's mainly because Youthberg can restand the Vanguard, get an additional attack. Tao Ren cannot do that. He can just get pretty beefy with this in his, evolved form, not in his revolve form, but evolved form. And other than that, it's just sort of focusing on controlling what your opponent can play out and being relatively aggressive, because if your opponent can't play cards from hand, or I should say if they can't play stuff on board, and they're constantly having to discard cards, as well as using, of course, the Joko engine to see what's in there, you can get a lot of advantage in and try to pressure them. It's a pretty nifty deck. I do hope it gets some sort of slightly better rearguard support in the future, but moving on to the Ride deck. Ride deck, as probably expected, is pretty simple. We've got the grade 0 Tao Ren that you have to play. When you go second, you draw a card because you ride over it with the hatred towards the Tao family Tao Ren, which says whenever you ride it over Tao Ren, you get to search your deck for a Bashong, put it in the back over rearguard circle, shuffle your deck, much like the other Shaman Kings, Shamans, that the grade 1 does the same skill. I might go over Wooden Sword Ryu, because I do have a deck for that, and he actually has different skills, or a different set of skills in his ride line. Then we've got the grade 2 here, who just says if this is boosted by Bashong, you get to draw a card. So it's pretty simple. Just boost with Bashong when it's already on board, unless you play, against PBO or something like that, it can actually retire that early, and you should be fine. But unless you draw a card, which is nice. And then finally, of course, we've got the grade 3 Unwavering Heart Tao Ren. For grade 3s, we got ourselves 3 copies of the Unwavering Heart Tao Ren, and then just 2 copies of the Super Bushin Tai Ren. So we're playing maximum copies of the Persona Ride. Persona Riding is great. It's also pretty easy to do with this deck. As I said, once the grade 3, this same grade 3 hits, you can actually add a copy of it to your hand. You can also add this one if you'd like, which sounds great and all, but of course getting your Vanguard to actually hit may or may not be easier than it actually is. You do have another card in this deck that actually lets you search this out, so it's not so bad. We're only playing 2 copies here of the Super Bushin Tao Ren, because in my opinion, he's not as good as Persona writing the original Tao Ren. So the Super Bushin Tao Ren is pretty interesting. What this says is this can obviously only be written over a grade 3 Tao Ren, so similar to all the super form for Yo that we went over. And this has the Oversoul ability here. Actually, no, sorry, it has the all-place ability here. When you place it on Vanguard Circle, search your deck for up to 1 grade 3 or greater Tao Ren and its card name, reveal it, put it to your hand. So on place, you can search a copy of this that you can use to Persona Ride next turn, which is pretty nice. And every time you write it, you get another copy. And then he has also the Oversoul ability, which doesn't have Counterblast, which is nice. And you can put a rearguard with by showing it so its card name into your soul. Choose 3 of your opponent's rearguard, retire them, and this unit gets 10k for every 5 cards in your drop. So this guy can get really huge because of the fact, at least in the build that I've played, I Soul Blast out a lot because of the way Bashon works, and you can get your drop really hefty, which makes this guy really big. And he does retire 3 rearguards, which is nice. However, aside from that, that is it. You don't, power up your rearguards. If you go into this on your 4th turn, you don't have Persona Ride, and your drop zone might not be as big, so he won't really do too much. Retiring 3 rearguards is cool, but might not be usable in some matchups, right? Might be cool for like Leonore or Magnolia or something like that, but something like Gravidia, Barrel Magus, maybe even Nirvana, which may only have 2 rearguards, it might not be as useful. But nonetheless, this is a nice thing to go into, especially against those matchups where they have a full board. You can go try and go into this. I just don't like the thought of just losing a turn, basically, because you don't Persona Ride, whereas going into the Persona Ride is a little stronger. Because, you can draw a card, give you front row, plus 10k, as opposed to just having a big bad Vanguard swing here, especially since it doesn't have any guard restrict or anything like that. For the grade 2s, we've got ourselves 3 copies of the world's top comedian, Joko. I'm probably going to bump this up to 4 copies. And next, we've got ourselves 4 copies of the Law of the Jungle, Horo Horo. We got ourselves 4 copies of the other Joko here, Wind of Laughter That Will Save the World, Joko. 2 copies of the grade 2 Tao Ren, the double rare, the Towards the Eternal World Tao Ren, and the last card is actually going to be Future King Hao, the grade 2. So we've gone over Joko here a couple of times, every time that we've done a Shaman King deck profile, just because he's so good. And I'm trying to challenge myself to not use him in any more decks, and also not have to buy any more of him. I'm surprised this guy isn't like $50 by now. But what he does is, on place on Vanguard Circle, for that turn, your opponent cannot intercept. Not that great an ability in the late games, because you'll be just retiring your opponent's front row with Tao Ren anyways, but it is still nice, especially early on. And also if you don't even, for whatever reason, don't feel like Oversoul, that is nice. Then he also has a skill where you can Soul Blast 2 search your deck for up to 1 Jaguar Mick, call it to Vanguard Circle in the same column as this unit, and then shuffle your deck. So between him and Mick, they become 23k, which is really nice. 1 card gives you a full column. Playing 3 copies of that for now. But we actually have 4 copies of the other Joko here, which is Wind of Laughter That Will Save the World, Joko. So this says when this unit is placed on Vanguard Circle, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Tao Ren or Horo Horo in its card name, you can Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Choose up to 1 unit with Tao Ren or Horo Horo in its card name from among them, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. And if not, you countercharge 1. So if you whiff, you get the cost back. The Soul Blast is fine because you want to Soul Blast out your Bashons because he can come back. So we don't want him to be in Soul. That makes it really good. This also helps us get Persona Rising as well as anything as we want. It also helps the deck with deck thinning, which is really good because it, makes sure that our Vanguard can check those big triggers. I don't know why it's having so much trouble focusing on Joko here, but alright. We're playing 4 copies of that. Then we're playing here Law of the Jungle, Horo Horo. So this says when this unit attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, if you have a Vanguard with Tao Ren or Joko in its card name, this unit gets 5k to the end of that battle. So it is a 15k attacker, grade 2, that can intercept, and when it does intercept, during the battle that your Vanguard with Tao Ren or Joko in its card name is attacked, this guy gets 10k shield. So he's a 15k shield for the Vanguard specifically, which is pretty sick because you can swing in with him on your turn and guard with him the next turn, and you can also search this off your Joko. So it's pretty hard to miss this considering you have so many Tao Rens and so many of the Horo. We'll go over how in a bit, but we've got ourselves here the Towards the Eternal World Tao Ren. I'm mainly playing this instead of 2 more copies of the Super Bushin Tao Ren. If you feel like that card is a lot better for you, feel free to replace that in this build and see how that works. Instead, I've opted out for searching out a grade 2 Tao Ren and using that. This says when this unit attacks while not boosted, you can counterblast 1 and it gets 10k to the end of that battle. It's not super useful. This is only really good if you play something like Gravidia that retires your board and you need to desperately swing in, so this can swing in with it being the only thing on board. But we typically want to use our counterblast for other stuff. We're a little bit strapped for counterblast in a sec. This says when this unit attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, you can discard a card from your hand and cause your opponent to choose a card from their hand and discard. So you can use this in very key matchups where your opponent has something that they want to keep. So on a Tao Ren turn, you can pressure them heavily and possibly make them discard something like a grade 4 or something like that. So if Russian prison and they typically use up everything to guard and such, you can try and use this to make them discard their Seraph Snow after possibly wiping out their front row, making them discard another card possibly. So this is just something that you can use in very important matchups to get rid of cards, and also helps with the general control aspect of the deck. But it kind of depends on what your opponent wants to do, whether they want to let you hit with this or they want to let your Vanguard hit or take the other hit of your rearguard. So they have to kind of find a way to figure out what they want to do there for damage control. Then the last grade 3 we have here is actually Future King Hao. I mentioned this in the Le Surge deck list, where instead of Janine you can use this. Likewise, you can use Janine here as well. I originally had her instead of Future King Hao. Janine just says on place, use Soul Blast Flurry, counter charge, and draw a card. The Soul Blast is nice, it powers up your Super Bushin Tao Ren. Counter charge is nice, and drawing a card is nice. But since we're going a little bit more aggressive here, I decided to go with the Future King Tao Ren. You can also bump up some copies of this because you're constantly persona writing and oversouling, so you're constantly putting at least 2 cards into your soul every turn. So you can more than likely be able to use this more than once. It's also an act skill, so if your opponent doesn't retire this, you can actually get multiple uses out of it. But this just has the simple skill where you Soul Blast 3, choose one of your opponent's rear guards to retire them, and this unit gets a crit to the end of the turn. And he's not like some of the other Shaman King cards where they start out with 0 crit, he actually has 1 crit, so this will swing in for 2 damage. So this combos up with Tao Ren pretty well. You can retire back row with this after Tao Ren retires the front row. You can pull out the Bashon from the Soul, so you can use it again later on. Powers up your Super Bushin Tao Ren as well. And then once your opponent possibly has to discard a card from their hand, this might be a lot more difficult for them to guard, which is really nice. And that's kind of what we're going for, is clearing out board so we can start clearing out hand and making your opponent not really being able to guard. The grade 1s, we've got ourselves 4 copies of Jaguar Mick as expected, 3 copies of the Warrior Who Serves the Tao Family Bashong, and then finally just 4 copies of the PG. So Jaguar Mick, we've gone over twice already as well, but this is what you call out from the grade 2 Joko that Soul Blast 2. Then it also has an ability where if it boosts, this unit gets 2k into the end of the battle, but if it boosts a unit with Joko in its card name, it gets 5k instead of 2, and your opponent has to reveal 3 cards from their hand. So you get the hand knowledge and the ability to try and force your opponent to discard stuff. So in this deck, it becomes a sort of puzzle piece where you can use it to play a lot of mind games with your opponent, knowing what they have in hand and retiring and causing them to discard. So you have to kind of try not to give away the entire hand at that point, because if they show you 3 cards and discard a 4th card that was not from those 3, you have really good control over what's in their hand. It allows you to control the game that way. This is also really good in this deck because we play another Joko. So instead of the original 4 from the one that called it out, we also have the 4 that searches out Tao Ren and Horo Horo. So we have 7 targets in this deck, specifically 8 if you'd like to replace it with something else, which is why we're playing actually 4 copies here, because it's always pretty much going to be live. Then we've got ourselves a warrior who serves the Tao family Bashon here. This is the spirit that oversouls with the Tao Ren, and this has the skill where in drop, when you ride a grade 3 or greater, actually, no, it's actually when you're grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Tao Ren is, oh no, yeah, it is right. I thought it said whenever you place a Tao Ren, you would get it, but no, I was right. So yeah, whenever you ride a grade 3 or greater Tao Ren, and this is in your drop, if you don't have Bashon already, you can call this out to rearguard circle. So it's kind of like Maple, where it calls itself out every time you ride your grade 3, and you kind of want to make sure you Soul Blast this out, which is why I'm only playing 3 copies of this. I was originally only playing 2. You can cut the extra copy for the other Joko, but you can just very easily recycle this. You can get 1 in the start of the game, constantly Soul Blast it out, constantly get it back every time you re-ride. Obviously, if you miss your ride, you might not be able to have a Bashon, which is kind of the issue there. But I think 2 is a pretty decent number, especially since you have the triggers that you can still use for this, for your Oversoul. And of course, we're playing 4 copies of the better PGs here. I picked the Yo Asakura one just cause. But it just says you can use this from hand to guard and choose one of your units that doesn't get hit. If you have 2 or more cards in your hand, you have to discard a card. If you have 1 or less cards in your hand, you don't have to discard, so it becomes free, as opposed to the other starter deck or trial deck PG, which has 1k more attack, but you always have to discard no matter what, which leads into a situation where if you have no cards in hand, you cannot use it. The trigger lineup is going to be rather simple. It's going to be 8 crits, 8 of the Bashon, 8 of the Sealed Ultra Shijin Raiketsu. The reason we're playing this as opposed to the other crits is, any of the other crits, is that it is nice to have something that I can play out and can actually swing in sometimes. The soul doesn't really matter, but you can definitely play a different crit with this. I just happen to have them, so I threw them in here. Then we've got ourselves 3 copies of Blessing of the Great Spirit. I might bump this up to an additional copy. This is just good because you don't get extra attacks, you only have the 3 attacks, so in order to make yourself threatening as well as kind of bulky, with the use of the effect front here, which makes it a 20k shield, it allows your rearguards to become a lot stronger and allows you to stay into the game. I think it's a really good option as opposed to the draws, where if you deck thin the deck to try and hit crits more often, you'll possibly draw into those crits, which might not be as great. Play 4 copies of the Heal Bashon, because we want to be able to oversoul, so that gives us 8 targets from our triggers, and then 11 counting the deck, so that's a 4th of our deck that we can oversoul with. And we're actually playing Obaria here as the overtrigger. You're more than welcome to use the Shaman King overtrigger. That one is really good. That one has the effect where if you check it, you just deal your opponent damage, and free damage for almost practically no cost, other than the cost of having to actually check it, is very good. However, the other skill of it is that it's a trigger order, so you can play it as an order to retire your opponent's board. We kind of already have a lot of retire here to begin with, so we don't ideally, we won't ideally be able to use that skill as well. And being able to use this as a 50k shield is pretty nice. And then since our rearguard attacks are not as threatening, we can also give them 100 million power. So I have 2 units I can swing in with 100 million power, making them a lot more threatening and a lot stronger, and also a lot more difficult to guard, since our opponent will not have, as many resources, since we're trying to control board in hand with this deck. That's kind of the mentality behind using Obaria instead. Again, more than free to use the other overtrigger. I just feel like Obaria has the slight advantage in most cases for this deck. So let's see if we can go through this rather quickly. There's not really too much I can tell you from mulliganing. You don't necessarily need Obaria obviously in hand, but to make not as much, you can keep the Joko here, which is really nice. The Tao Ren Persona Ride is basically what you're aiming for, because you obviously want to be able to Persona Ride, because that is basically your main strength other than retiring. Retiring is great and all, but it doesn't always matter. Depending on, you know, the matchup you're fighting against, they might be able to protect against it, or they might not just even care about you being able to retire their units. So that's why it's not that bad. I forgot to draw first before shuffling, but that's fine. We got a pretty decent hand here. So what we can do, let's say we go first, we can very easily discard the Bashong, which is nice. I realized that being able to have cards that can actually be discarded and get you value is actually pretty good in overdress, just because most times before you even get to grade 3, the game can almost be decided based on what you mulliganed for and what you were able to discard for ride, because that all matters on whether or not you will actually be able to do what you need to do and stop your opponent from being able to do what they're able to do, or more so be able to counteract what your opponent's trying to do, be it guarding or whatnot. So we can go first, take a damage here, lose Joko. We're very sad about that. We can draw into another Bashong. Look at that. Isn't that convenient? Super value. And then we can just go ahead and attack here. These two are only useful on grade 3, so no point using them now. Since we're boosting with Bashong, we get to draw a card here, and then we can check another PG. Love it. And we can go ahead and take a damage here, lose another Joko. Wow, if only these things weren't lined up like that. Let's say our opponent lets us pass in that, so we can draw here. We can... let's maybe get rid of this Joko. So we can ride into the grade 3 Tao Ren here. Now you want to make sure that you oversoul before you play some of your cards. You can throw out the How, because he's act, but you don't want to play the other Joko before you oversoul. Now we can oversoul, we can retire, we can get 10k, and also if they only had 2 rear guards, or sorry, 1 rear guard, they have to discard a card here. We can go ahead and play this Joko here. We can go ahead and counterblast 1 and soul blast out the Bashong, so we can use that next turn. We got a whole drop full of Bashong, so whenever we ride, I'm sorry, whenever we ride, we can get it. Sorry, this is like a top 5. I almost totally flubbed that up. So we can look at top 5, and we can add either one of these. Judging from my hand, where I have a Persona Ride already in hand, I guess we can grab this guy just to not worry about it in deck. We can also add the other Tao Ren and try and swing in with him, but we don't really have the counterblast or the booster. I guess technically my opponent's in grade 2 at this point, which doesn't matter too much. But then we can go here into Future King How, and we can Soul Blast out 3, and now retire a back row that they might have had, and then we have a crit here. And then you always want to swing with your Vanguard first, unless you really need to search out the Persona Ride or something like that. You can even swing into a rear if they have any somehow. I guess if it has resist, or they have an M-Pix to protect it or something in a case like that. But you want to try and check off your, you know, your fronts, but also your opponent, depending on the amount of damage they have, they might just eat this and try and guard the other 2 attacks, which lets you hit and search out your deck. Gonna hit a heal trigger. Maybe we heal, we don't know. Let's say we did hit that, and we can go ahead and search for any of the Tao Ren, so we can search that to our hand here, which means now we have a slightly better chance of checking triggers next turn, which is dope. We can swing in, give power here, swing in here, and then swing in here with 20 and a crit. We can get our ass cheeks clapped. There we go, power there. And then we can very easily next turn draw 4 turn, ride into Tao Ren, draw a card from Persona Ride, and then bring back Bashong. Very easily go ahead and oversoul here to retire board and possibly hand. And we got a nice thick hand going here. We can very easily overcall this to bring out the Joko to Soul Blast 2. So it's very easy to just get your soul and be able to Soul Blast it out, because you're constantly rewriting and you're constantly trying to get your Bashons out. So you can very easily do that. And now you got yourself a nice 33k column here, which is very cool. We can play this back to a 25k attacker, as well as a unit that can go ahead and guard us next turn. This also kind of makes the deck a little bit decent against prison, because you'll have no soul for your opponent to steal from you. check nothing. That's just how it be. And we can swing in 33, force them to show cards in hand. They couldn't intercept this turn, but retired their whole board, or at least their front row, so it does not matter. And that's kind of what you want to do. You want to keep doing that. Eventually, if you feel it's worth it, you can go into the Super Boost Tao Ren, get another Super Boost Tao Ren, Persona Ride it with next turn if you think you're going to survive, and you need to retire, and you have a big enough drop. And that's basically the deck. So that is going to do it for this video here. Let me know what you guys think of the deck. I don't think Tao Ren is super great. I think he has some pretty cool mechanics, and I think he can be pretty good in, you know, very experienced hands. I think he has some decent tools to play with, but he just needs either a way to make his Vanguard swing more threatening, or a way to make his rear guards be more powerful, or something like that, and then he'll be really good, or an extra Vanguard swing, which probably seems like where this deck is going, or, you know, multi-attack or something like that, just so you can keep up with everyone else. Then you can kind of justify everything else. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, or if there's any other decks you'd like me to go over. And until next time, take care of yourself, play Vanguard, and have yourself a damn good one.